lovely to see you all, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our amazing panel. We've never had a seminar with 4 speakers before, so this is something really new for us. I will introduce them, and I will just briefly talk about their work and what they do, but they're really the focus, and they're going to talk about their poems and then the journey these poems have taken into translation. I think we would all really like it if you felt able and willing to contribute and join in. So we may ask for speakers, people to read poems in the other languages. What you've got here are just the English source texts. But I have the technology to project some of the translations. That'd be wonderful if any of you felt like contributing by reading those for us in your languages. Yeah? So let me just quickly say then that this is the fifth event in our Centre for Translation and Interpreting Studies seminar series. This time is a little bit different because this is in collaboration with and association with the University of Sanctuary Initiative and also the Leicester Migration Network. So we're very pleased to have Phil here with us from the University of Sanctuary, and he's going to say a couple of words about what that is. We have 4 poets. Ambrose Musiyiwa, who's the coordinator, one of the 2 coordinators with Emily of the Journeys in Translation project. Elvire Roberts, who works with British Sign Language. Pam Thompson, who's a poet and performer and reviewer and writing tutor. And Liz Byfield, who's worked in education and now writes poetry. And on your leaflet, you have much more detailed information about each of them. I want to try and keep the time for the poems, so I'm not going to say any more about that. I will hand over to Phil briefly, and I'm going to go here and control the technology if I can.
Okay, and I'm going to speak very briefly as well, because like you, I'm here to see to listen to the poems. I just want to briefly just talk to you about University of Sanctuary. So I work with people across the university. What we're trying to do is to make the university a welcoming place for refugees and asylum seekers, and we're doing that in a number of ways, supporting events that are already going on, organising some events ourselves. Moving forwards, already in my own department, which is English language, we're offering free places to refugees and asylum seekers to study language, and hopefully moving forward we'll be offering as a university full scholarships to support refugees and asylum seekers who would like to continue or start their higher education. So I'm really pleased to support this event. One of the things we're looking to do is to get as many people across the university involved, not just kind of academic staff, but students and refugees themselves. One simple way in which you could get involved would be to either become a kind of champion or a supporter of the initiative, the University of Sanctuary. If you could just drop me a note if you're interested, I can tell you what that means. Basically, a supporter is what it says, that you think this is a great initiative, and we want to kind of build up a distribution list so you can share ideas with you. As a champion, we'll be asking for maybe a little bit more of sort of coming up with ideas and maybe help with a little bit of organisation within your departments and things like that. But if you're interested in finding out more, just drop me a line at that email address, and enjoy the poetry. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil. Ambrose, over to you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about Journeys in Translation, and I'm also going to tell you a little bit about Overland Oversea, from which the poems we are using come from. And then we are going to have a reading and a performance. I call it a performance. Elvire will explain why we are calling it a performance. In 2015, some of you will remember that we started seeing a lot of images of people who were moving across Europe, over the Mediterranean, across Europe. And we also started getting reports about how about the reception that they were receiving. Most of the media coverage, mainstream media coverage that we were getting was extremely negative. But then in other places where people were looking at exactly the same things and responding to what they were seeing, what people were saying was different from what the newspapers and the television were saying, was also different from what politicians were saying. So there was a mismatch between discourse, between dialogue at street level and discourse on platforms like TV, newspapers, and the radio. As poets, we also felt that we wanted to respond to what we were seeing, and the best way that we could respond to it was through poetry. So we put together an editorial group, and we put together a call for submissions, and we got submissions from around the world. Most of the contributors and the editors and the publisher are based in the East Midlands. The publisher is based in Nottingham and is Five Leaves Bookshop, who are probably one of the best independent bookshops, book publishers in the East Midlands. And the editors, three of them are based here in Leicester. One of them is based in Nottingham but works at De Montfort University. Actually, two of them worked at De Montfort University. The anthology was being sold to raise funds for Doctors Without Borders, for Leicester City of Sanctuary, and also for the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Refugee Forum. The reason why it was raising funds for the Nottingham and Nottinghamshire Refugee Forum was because the publisher is based in Nottingham. Why it was raising funds for Leicester City of Sanctuary is because a lot of us are based in Leicester. Why it was raising funds for Doctors Without Borders is because of all the players on the scene, Doctors Without Borders were the most proactive. They were responding to a crisis the way that states should have been responding. And they had a search and rescue mission, and were rescuing people in the Mediterranean, making sure that they got to places of safety. So the anthology itself has had about 3 print runs, and is the best-selling poetry anthology that I am aware of, and that is really, really good. And we've raised a fair bit of money for the charities, the 3 charities that we set out to raise funds for. In promoting the anthology, we had book launches in a number of places. We had book launches here in Leicester, we had book launches in Nottingham, Scotland, London. We also had an event last year where we took about 8 poems from the anthology and printed them on postcards and gave the postcards out at the train station here in Leicester. The reason why we chose the train station and we chose postcards was because through postcards we were hoping that the postcards would encourage people to reflect on journeys that other people have taken in the past, and also journeys that people are taking now. And then this year we built on the Journeys pop-up library that was held at the train station. We built on it by encouraging people to take 13 poems from the anthology and translate them into other languages. Not only translate them, but also reflect on the process of translation. Do the poems, do the meanings stay the same across languages, or do they change? If they change, what might be the cause of that change? And we are also encouraging people to organize events of their own, a bit like the Journeys in Translation event that we are having here today. You know, if you would like to organize one of your own, by all means do so. And also let us know how that goes. The first poem, a little bit more about the translation. So far, the poems have been translated into over 25 languages, and there are more languages coming. There have been events in Romania, there have been events in Italy, there might be a few that are coming in Greece. We've also got translators in India, Leicester, Scotland, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. So we've got people who are working on the same thing in many different countries, which is absolutely brilliant. So the poem that I'm going to start with is on page 5. So for this one, I will give you a little bit of the background and then read the poem. And then we also hope that one of you will read one of the other languages that the poem has been translated into. The poem is called The Men Who Ran Through the Tunnel, and was inspired by news reports around a man who walked through the Channel Tunnel and was almost in Folkestone when he was found. Newspapers and TV programs that were commenting on how the man walked through the tunnel were giving it as something that was to be frowned on. They gave it as they were presenting it as an invasion of some sort. They were giving it as a breach. But then when I saw and had exactly the same thing, I saw something different. I responded to it differently. And this is the way I responded to it. So, the man who ran through the tunnel. When I heard how he ran across continents, over rivers, through forests, through deserts, and through tunnels, how could I fail to be inspired? I suggested that we have someone read from one of the translations, but we can do it differently. How many languages do we speak here? Yeah, how many? A language, please. Someone. I know we've got Arabic. How many? What else? Spanish. Italian. Polish. Okay, so anyone who speaks Polish, please stand up. Please stand. Arabic. Yeah, please stand if you speak Arabic. Polish, Italian, Greek. What other language? German. Yeah. Italian. Spanish.
Somebody speaks French.
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 Yeah. Okay. So that's enough languages. So okay, please keep standing. We are going to do something slightly different. Together we are going to translate the poem line by line as we go along. It doesn't. Your translation doesn't have to be, perfect. Translate it as you are hearing it, and let's do it at the same time. So, the man who ran through the tunnel. Yeah, the man who ran through the tunnel.
Der Mann, der durch den Tunnel gerannt ist.
Say it in Polish.
Sorry?
Człowiek, który przeszedł przez tunel.
Spanish.
Yeah.
Can you say?
The man who ran through the tunnel.
Los hombres que pasaron por el túnel.
The man who ran through the tunnel. The man who ran through the tunnel. Yeah.
L'uomo che corse attraverso il tunnel.
El hombre que corrió a través del túnel.
Right. So we've got the languages. So I'm going to read a line and then you translate it. And let's be as loud as we want to be. The
You want
man.
them to do it all at once?
Yeah, please.
All at once?
All at once.
Okay,
The man who ran through the tunnel.
go.
When I heard how he ran across continents, over rivers, through forests, through deserts, and through tunnels, how could I fail to be inspired? Right. When I heard how he ran across continents. One more time. When I heard how he ran across continents. Over rivers. Through forests. Through deserts. Through tunnels. How could I fail to be inspired? Thank you. So for the next one, we won't put you through the same levels of discomfort. We'll just put one person through some levels of discomfort. Yeah. For the next one, the person who is going to read is Liz. Liz, her poem, she will explain how it came about, and then read it.
Thank you, Ambrose. Please tell me if I'm not speaking loud enough, if you can't hear at the back. Right. Stick your hand up if you can't hear. Right. This poem was inspired by a television broadcast that I saw one lunchtime. I'd been watching BBC television news broadcasts and being brought to the edge of tears so many times, thinking there's nothing I can do. I can't do anything. And then I saw something about Overland, Oversea as a project for people who write poetry to submit poems. And I thought, this is something that I can do. I can open people's minds, engage people's emotions, because that's what poetry does. To me, it's engaging emotions. And it would open doors, certainly the journeys in translation, opens doors to, well, worldwide, so that hopefully all the people will feel the appropriate emotions and something can be done to help these people. This was, as I said, a broadcast on the BBC at lunchtime, and I just imagined that I was standing behind the camera and operating it. And what comes at the end of this poem was a real surprise to me. It showed me that these people, although they were in impossible situations, going through harrowing times, there was still a power amongst them, a resilience to what was happening and a hope for the future. My poem is called Through the Lens. A bus stops. The crowd surges forward, a frantic rush and crush. Zoom in. Small arms clinging around a man's neck. A frail old lady hoisted aboard. A clinging handhold broken. Long shot. Bus disappearing. Makeshift camp resettling. Light and hope fading. Zoom out. Empty water bottles arranged in a circle and 3 blankets. 2 small and 1 long arranged in a curve, into a gentle curve, making a perfect smiley face. Thank you. Now then, translation. I won't do what Ambrose did. It doesn't make any sense to me at all.
We
do
have
have
text.
some text written out. Now, when I saw that picture, that really brought a different dimension to the poem to me. So it's useful to have different languages, including the language of art, to develop the idea. So, yeah, which is the first language we come to? Could you move it on? German. Would you like to read the poem in German for us?
I can do that. Durch die Linse. Ein Bus hält. Die Menschenmenge strömt vorwärts. Eine rasante Eile und Gedränge. Hineinzoomen. Kleine Arme halten sich fest am Hals eines Mannes. Eine gebrechliche alte Dame an Bord gebracht. Ein klammernder Griff zerrissen. Fernaufnahme. Bus verschwindet. Provisorische Lager werden umgesiedelt. Licht und Hoffnung schwinden. Rauszoomen. Leere Wasserflaschen in einem Kreis angeordnet und 3 Decken, eine kleine und eine lange, in einem leichten Schwung gebogen, bilden ein perfektes Lächeln.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
How about Chinese?
Chinese? Come on, girl.
Is there anyone who would volunteer to read my poem in Chinese?
Go on.
We have.
Can you see? Do you want to come up here so you can see better? If you're willing. If I make it any bigger, we're going to lose the whole poem. So.
Is it readable like that?
Yeah. Or you can sit here, if you prefer. Yeah. And then you can read it from the screen.
Yeah, hearing it read in different languages gives it a slightly different flavour. But it has a slightly different melody, which is.
镜头中，公车停站，人群簇拥，凌乱癫狂。镜头推进，一只瘦小的手臂搭在一个个男人的头上，孱弱的老妇也被人抬到了车上，她的拐杖断成了2半。长镜头里，公车渐行渐远，临时搭建的帐篷也慢慢复原，光和希望也坠入深渊。镜头推远，用空瓶子围成的一个圆，圈住薄毯的缠绵，折成2短1长的3条线，留下一张温柔的笑脸。
Thank you so much.
Hi. I'm Pam Thompson, and my poem is Dislocation on page 2. I was interested, certainly, in a poem which relied very much on images, very concrete details related to place, to people, and to experiences.
And I wanted also words to reverberate with different meanings. And I think this is especially, certainly in the first case, apparent in probably this poem, but also in the different translations. Of course, those meanings will reverberate also in different languages. So I wanted to start at a title, which again could lead you in several directions at the same time. So the word dislocation implies something that's put out of place. It can physically imply, say you've got a dislocated shoulder, something out of joint, implying something very painful. It can also imply estrangement when you're separated from something you know and that's something you're very familiar with, which we know is the common experience of refugees, people who've had to leave a place of comfort, of safety, to be moved to another. The word dislocation seems to reverberate with these different meanings. It can mean loss, a loss of identity, a loss of being, a loss of, this idea of identity I think is very important. I think we all ask the question, who are we from day to day? But when you have to move from the place you've been born in, you've grown up with, where your culture lies and your language lies, your family, your friends, that sense of who you are, being dislocated from yourself, I think is very strong. So certainly the title I wanted to reverberate with those different meanings. And as I said, some of the things in the poem, day passing to night, experiences that we all have, but which can become nightmarish when you have been dislocated. And some elements in the poem are common elements of people's lives, possibly things that we take for granted, but when they're gone, we just forget the stability that were there, the things that we have taken for granted and that people have lost. This poem's been translated into several languages. Elvire has translated it, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful translation into British Sign Language. And she's also translated it into French. After I read this out in English, Elvire will give the British Sign Language version, which is on YouTube. So there's a version of Elvire performing this on YouTube. And then maybe we can have another version for somebody to read as well, which would be lovely. Dislocation. Days pass, become one long day. Words run away. Mountain, sanity, salt. Shadows sound like trains. Nights on trains become one long night. Words fly. Passport, pushchair, rights. Waiting at borders like birds on precarious perches, where shadows sound like rain, smell like pain.
I'll talk a bit more about British Sign Language later, but I just want to do my interpretation immediately after the poem. And it was the first poem out of the whole thing that, out of all the poems, I knew I had to translate that, and reading it I could already think of translations. And that is precisely because of the visual nature that Pam's been talking about. There is no written form of sign language, you have to film everything. There is a linguistic coding that you can do that is inaccessible to anybody who's not a linguist. So everything has to be done from memory. So this is from memory. The next poem I can't quite remember in the same way. My hands remember this one. The next one, it relies on my mind, so I need some of the English to prompt it. So in this, it's and I made a choice about the title. So there were two signs I could have used for the title. There's this sign, or there's this sign. And this is the joints coming out sign, and also can be a kind of psychosis sign. and this is the disconnect sign, and I went with the disconnect.
You want another language? There's another visual translation.
Yeah, there's a visual translation now, but we can roll on to see what comes up. What's this?
Shona.
This is Shona. This is Ambrose. Or should we have?
I think it.
Should we have one of the
I think
audience?
Yeah.
So we have Elvire's French translation. There are two French. We can have one of the French ones or Turkish. What's this? Bengali? Yes? Hold on. Any Bengali translate? No.
Can we go with French?
Not sure what's after that. We've got another German.
German.
Keep rolling. Go back. German. It's wonderful to have so many Chinese. Spanish. Let's have Spanish. Spanish speaker. Yes.
No.
Yeah. Everyone in the tent. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
come up, thank you. Do you want to come here so you can read from this?
Yes.
Easy and
Distanciamiento. Los días pasan, se convierten en un largo día, las palabras escapan. Montaña, cordura, sal. Las sombras suenan a tren. Las noches sobre trenes se convierten en una larga noche. Las palabras vuelan. Pasaporte, cochecito, derechos. Esperando en las fronteras, como pájaros, sobre precarias perchas donde las sombras suenan a lluvia. Huelen a dolor.
Thank you.
So one of the other poems that we've got is called Yala, and it was written by Trevor Wright. The translation, the poem has been translated into many languages, and it also has a musical conceptualization where a group of musicians take the poem and they give it a musical treatment. So they set it to music, and there's music with the song, and it uses fragments and movements that are inspired by the song. And it has also been illustrated by George. And Pam and Elvire are going to give us an interpretation between the two of them.
I'm reading on behalf of Trevor Wright, so bear with me, it's the first time I've read this poem while Elvire will give her translation. Yalla. Shadowed by fissured rock, fingers funneling cooling sand. The pull of the moon carving the rhythm I need to pierce the gloom. Smell the horizon. Taste futures. I hunker down to take soft hand to hand as she quietly asks, who hears? Who sees? Will land touch us? Night folds in. Of course I laugh. The stars listen, the moon sees. New land will find us. Yalla. Yet another dawn. Chin to chest, rib to rib. My last daughter curves in my lap, exposed to a firmament, fully intent on pressing our shared breaths to the depths. I raise my trailed palm, cool my brow, wrinkled fingers stroke dreams, residue all at odds with the tides. Does anyone tune into the stars? Who cares what the moon sees? Will land reach out? Yalla, yalla.
I just want to talk very briefly about the concept of translation. Have you all done stuff like domestication and foreignization, covered that kind of thing? So, in most languages, you'll work into your first language as your preference, and interpreters in British Sign Language and in any other sign language, so every country and actually lots of regions have got their own sign language, it's got its own dialects, because you need to be able to hear the person speaking in order to produce it. We're all second language users of the language, and even if you're born within a deaf family, you're still not audiologically deaf, and you don't have that fundamental cultural deafness. So interpreters in British Sign Language are always non-native in that effect. So I'm a poet as well, but I never write poetry, I never create poetry in British Sign Language because that feels like a colonisation. People think that a hearing person like me using sign language is terribly exotic and marvellous, and they meet a deaf person, they're scared of talking to them. So I have to be very respectful to the community and the language that I am interpreting for, as well as interpreting into English. And in sign language and sign language poetry, there's a lot of, it's one of the decisions I think that, because you've translated into Shona, one of the decisions is around how much you make it as it would be a poem if written in that language, with all the poetic forms of that language, or how much you reflect the poetic forms within the original text. So actually within dislocation there's not much rhyming. There's lots and lots of images but not much rhyming. But in British Sign Language you can't create something that looks like a poem without it having rhyme, and the way that rhyme works is in having similar hand shapes and in using repeated amounts of space and repeated signs, and some of the pausing is within that. So there are lots of decisions to be made around making a translation, and it's been quite an interesting process, I think, that I'd be quite interested to know how you feel about having been translated, because for me, having done one of the French translations and then seeing another French translation, I felt the other French translation took liberties. So it's quite how much you respect the original, and again how much opportunity you have to talk with the originator of the text is quite an important part of the process.